The neural restraints bit deep into Kira's skull as the interrogation chamber door hissed open. She had endured 17 cycles of this, the Vorthak Empire's finest torturers wielding pain like surgical instruments, each session designed to break another layer of her resistance. Her species, the Keepers, were bred for this. Enhanced bone density, redundant nervous systems, and minds trained from birth to compartmentalize suffering. She was a living vault, and the combination to unlock her secrets had cost the Empire. 3 interrogators so far. The footsteps approaching her restraint chair were different, lighter, less purposeful than the heavy bootfalls of Vorthak warriors. When she lifted her head, golden eyes blazing with defiance despite the exhaustion, she saw something that made her recoil instinctively. A human. The creature was small by galactic standards, barely 2 meters tall, with pale skin marked by old scars. Its brown hair hung in an unkempt fashion that would have been a breach of protocol in any civilized military. But it was the eyes that disturbed her most. Where Vorthak interrogators held cold calculation, where her own people bore stoic determination. This human's eyes held something she couldn't categorize, something warm. "Hello, Kira," the human said, voice carrying an accent she'd never heard. "My name is Jack. I'm going to get you out of here." Kira's training kicked in. This was a new technique, psychological manipulation through false hope. She'd studied it extensively. The Empire would send in someone pretending to be a rescuer, gain her trust, then exploit the emotional vulnerability. Her response was immediate and vicious. She lunged forward as far as her restraints allowed and sank her fangs deep into the human's forearm. Keeper bites were designed to incapacitate. Neurotoxic venom flooded through hollow teeth, while powerful. Jaw muscles ground bone against bone. She'd killed Vorthak guards with less contact, but Jack didn't scream, didn't pull away, didn't even flinch. Instead, his free hand came up and gently touched her shoulder. "It's okay," he whispered, and impossibly his voice remained steady despite the poison coursing through his system. "You're scared, I understand." Kira held the bite, waiting for him to collapse, to call for guards, to reveal this as another torture. But seconds stretched into a full minute, and Jack simply stood there, his hand warm on her shoulder, his breathing steady despite the toxins that should have dropped him in moments. "You can let go when you're ready," he said softly. "I'm not going anywhere. Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. Sarge's Tale Stories is just beginning, and your support matters. If you love emotional sci-fi tales, forbidden connections, and stories that stay with you, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you." For the first time in 17 cycles, Kira felt something crack in her chest that wasn't a rib. This human, this impossible, gentle creature, was either the most sophisticated psychological weapon she'd ever encountered, or something entirely outside her experience. His blood tasted different than any species. She'd bitten before, cleaner somehow. And beneath the metallic tang there was something else. Something that reminded her of home before the war, before the capture, before she learned that kindness was just another word for weakness. Slowly, confused by her own actions, she released her bite. Jack's arm bore the deep puncture wounds of her fangs, blood flowing freely, but his expression never changed from that same gentle concern. "There we are," he said, as if she'd done something praiseworthy instead of trying to kill him. "Now, let's talk about getting these restraints off. I've got about 10 minutes before the guards change shift, and frankly, I'd rather not explain to them why I'm bleeding all over their nice, clean torture chamber." Despite everything, the pain, the fear, the years of conditioning, Kira found herself wanting to trust him, and that terrified her more than any torture device the Vorthak had ever shown her. Jack's fingers moved across the neural restraint controls with surprising familiarity. Kira watched, still tasting his blood on her tongue, as he bypassed 3 security protocols in less than 30 seconds. The restraints clicked open with a soft hiss, and for the first time in months, she could move freely. Her first instinct was to test him again. Freedom meant options, and options meant she could properly evaluate this strange human's intentions, but when she tried to stand, her legs buckled. Months of confinement had taken their toll, and only Jack's quick reflexes kept her from hitting the floor. "Easy there," he murmured, supporting her weight without complaint despite his wounded arm. "Muscle atrophy's a bitch. Here, let me help." "Why?" The word came out as a growl, distorted by her species' natural vocal structure. It was the first word she'd spoken to anyone in weeks. Jack paused in his efforts to steady her, meeting her golden eyes directly. "Because leaving you here wasn't an option." "That's not an answer." "Sure it is." He adjusted his grip, taking more of her weight. "Just not the one you expected." Kira studied his face, searching for deception. The keepers were natural lie detectors, evolutionary necessity when dealing with dozens of species across the galaxy. But Jack's micro-expressions remained consistent. No pupil dilation indicating stress. No subtle muscle tensions suggesting fabrication. Either he was telling the truth, or he was the most sophisticated liar she'd ever encountered. "You're not Empire," she stated. "Definitely not. Alliance? Nope. Independent contractor." Jack's mouth quirked upward in what she recognized as a human smile. "Getting warmer. How about we discuss my employment status somewhere that isn't an active torture facility?" Before she could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the complex. Red emergency lighting bathed the chamber in bloody illumination and automated. Voices echoed through the corridors in 3 different languages. "Shit," Jack muttered. "That's earlier than expected." "You triggered the alarms?" "Not intentionally." He moved toward the chamber's weapon locker, still supporting her weight. "Though, I may have been less subtle than planned during my approach." The weapon locker opened to his touch, another impossibility that Kira filed away for later analysis. Jack selected a plasma rifle and a smaller sidearm, then turned to her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest," he said. "Can you fight?" Kira straightened, drawing on reserves of strength she'd hoarded through months of captivity. "I am a keeper of the third sanctum. We are born for war." "That's not what I asked." The distinction surprised her. Most species equated capability with willingness, strength with aggression. But Jack seemed to understand the difference between being able to kill and choosing to do so. "Yes," she said simply, "I can fight." He handed her the sidearm. "Good, because we've got about 60 meters of hostile corridor between us and my ship, and I'm betting they're not going to let us walk out politely." The weapon felt familiar in her hands despite the alien design. Human engineering was different from what she was used to. Less elegant than Keeper technology, more brutal than Vorthak designs, but undeniably effective. The grip had been modified for non-human hands, she noticed, specifically for Keeper. "Physiology. You planned for this," she realized. "I planned for a lot of things." Jack checked his rifle's charge level, including the possibility that you might not want to be rescued. "And if I had refused?" Jack met her eyes again, and in them she saw something that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. "Then I would have sat in that chair until you changed your mind." The simple certainty in his voice shook her more than months of torture had managed. She was a weapon, a tool bred for a specific purpose. The concept of someone valuing her choice over her utility was foreign to everything she'd been taught about the galaxy. The sound of approaching boots echoed from the corridor outside. "Ready?" Jack asked. Kira tested her grip on the sidearm, feeling strength flow back into muscles that had been idle too long. "Ready?" They moved toward the door together, and for the first time since her capture, Kira felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. The corridor erupted into chaos the moment they stepped through the doorway. Vorthak soldiers, their chitinous armor gleaming under the emergency lights, had established a defensive position behind portable barriers. Plasma bolts scorched the air, leaving ozone trails and molten scars on the walls. Jack moved like liquid violence, where Keeper combat doctrine emphasized overwhelming force and Vorthak tactics relied on coordinated brutality. The human fought with an improvisational creativity that defied prediction. He used the narrow corridor to his advantage, ricocheting shots off polished surfaces and somehow making the confined space work against enemies who outnumbered them 5-1. Kira found herself fighting differently too. Usually she would have charged straight into the enemy formation, trusting her enhanced physiology to carry her through. But something about fighting beside Jack made her more tactical. She found herself providing covering fire while he flanked, anticipating his movements without conscious thought. "Left corridor, 3 more incoming," she called out, her enhanced hearing picking up the distinctive scrabble of Vorthak claws on metal. Jack nodded, already adjusting his position. "Can you hold the main group for 30 seconds? 37? "Seconds," she corrected, her tactical implants calculating ammunition consumption and enemy response times. "Show off," Jack muttered, but she caught the approval in his voice. The next 37 seconds passed in a blur of coordinated violence. Kira's shots were surgical, precise, each blast finding gaps in armor or disabling weapons, rather than going for immediate kills. She realized with surprise that she was trying to minimize casualties. In all her years as a Keeper warrior, enemy deaths had been statistics. But something about Jack's presence made her want to be better than she was trained to be. When the corridor finally fell silent, 6 Vorthak soldiers lay stunned or wounded, but none dead. Jack checked each one efficiently, ensuring they would remain unconscious but unharmed. "Why?" Kira asked, watching him treat a burn wound on one of their former captors. "Why what? Why spare them? They would not have shown us the same courtesy." Jack finished applying a medical patch and stood, his wounded arm moving stiffly but functionally. "Because someone has to be better, might as well be us." The philosophy struck her as dangerously naive, yet she couldn't argue with its effectiveness. The wounded soldiers would recover. They would remember being shown mercy by enemies who could have easily killed them. In her experience, such memories had a way of spreading, of changing how conflicts played out in subtle but important ways. They reached the hangar level without encountering further resistance. Jack's ship waited in Docking Bay 7, a sleek craft that bore no identifying marks or national symbols. It was clearly built for speed and stealth rather than combat, though Kira's trained eye spotted weapon ports concealed beneath retractable panels. "Home sweet home," Jack said, activating the boarding ramp with a gesture. The ship's interior was a study in controlled chaos. Advanced navigation equipment shared space with what appeared to be personal mementos, photographs of humans she didn't recognize, a musical instrument of unfamiliar design, books printed on actual paper. It felt lived in rather than military, personal rather than functional. "Make yourself comfortable," Jack said, settling into the pilot's seat. "We'll be clear of Imperial space in about 20 minutes. Kira strapped herself into the co-pilot's chair, still clutching the sidearm he'd given her. As the ship lifted off, she watched through the viewport as the prison complex grew smaller beneath them. Freedom felt surreal after so many months in captivity. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Depends," Jack replied, his hands dancing across the controls with practiced ease. "Where do you want to go?" The question caught her off guard. In all her scenarios for escape, she'd assumed she would be trading one form of captivity for another. Rescued prisoners typically became intelligence assets or bargaining chips. The idea that she might actually have a choice in her destination was foreign. "I don't understand." Jack engaged the autopilot and turned to face her fully. "You're free, Kira, genuinely free. I'm not taking you anywhere you don't want to go, and I'm not handing you over to anyone without your consent. That's impossible. No one provides rescue services without compensation." "True," Jack agreed. "But who says I'm not being compensated?" Before she could ask what he meant, proximity alarms began sounding. 3 Imperial pursuit craft had launched from the station below, their angular forms cutting through space with predatory grace. Jack's expression never changed, but his hands were already moving across the weapons console. "Well," he said conversationally, "this should be interesting." The pursuit ships closed distance with military precision, their formation designed to prevent escape rather than destroy. They wanted Kira back alive, which gave Jack certain tactical advantages. He banked the ship hard to starboard, using the prison station's bulk as temporary cover while he calculated jump coordinates. "They're jamming our hyperspace engine," Kira observed, reading the tactical display with professional interest. "I noticed." Jack's fingers flew across the controls, rerouting power and adjusting their trajectory. "Good thing I brought backup. Plans." The ship suddenly dropped into a dive that would have been impossible for most vessels. Kira felt her enhanced physiology compensate for G-forces that should have liquefied a normal humanoid, but Jack seemed completely unaffected. His species' tolerance for acceleration was apparently higher than intelligence reports suggested. "How are you doing that?" she asked, watching him maneuver through a debris field that offered concealment but should have shredded their hull. "Practice," Jack replied, threading the ship between two massive chunks of destroyed metal with centimeters to spare. Plus, humans have this thing about not accepting limitations. A plasma blast scorched past their starboard side, close enough to trigger heat warnings. The pursuit ships had found them, their sensors cutting through the electromagnetic interference of the debris field. "I need you to do something for me," Jack said, his voice calm despite the increasingly desperate nature of their situation. "See that panel beside your left knee? Open it." Kira complied, revealing a complex array of crystalline components she didn't recognize. "What is this?" "Keeper technology. Specifically, a quantum resonance amplifier keyed to your biosignature." She stared at him in shock. Keeper quantum tech was among the most closely guarded secrets in the galaxy. The fact that he possessed it, much less knew how to integrate it with human systems, suggested resources and connections that redefined everything she thought she knew about him. "Where did you get this?" "Gift from a friend." Jack executed another impossible maneuver, actually flying through the hollow interior of a destroyed capital ship. "Touch the primary crystal, the one that looks like it's glowing." Kira's hand hovered over the component. Activating unknown Keeper technology was dangerous under the best circumstances. In their current situation, it could be catastrophic, but Jack had shown her nothing but kindness and competence. He'd endured her attack without retaliation, freed her without conditions, and was now risking his life to ensure her continued freedom. If he meant her harm, he'd had countless opportunities to inflict it. She touched the crystal, the ship transformed around them. What had been a fast but conventional craft became something that defied physics as she understood them. Space seemed to bend around their hull, distances compressed, and suddenly they were moving at velocities that should have required hyperspace engines. "Quantum tunneling," Jack explained, watching their pursuit ships fall behind as if they were standing still. "Your people figured out how to fold space-time on a localized level. Fascinating technology." "That's impossible. Keeper quantum research is classified beyond even our own military's access." "Yeah, well." Jack's expression grew distant for a moment. "I told you someone was compensating me for this rescue. I just didn't mention who." The implication hit her like a physical blow. "My people sent you." "Not exactly." Jack began shutting down the quantum amplifier, returning them to normal space near the edge of the system. "Your sister did." The word struck Kira silent. Her sister, Mira, had been presumed dead in the same battle where Kira was captured. The possibility that she had survived, that she had somehow found Jack and commissioned her rescue, changed everything. "That's impossible," Kira whispered. "She died on Kepler Station." "She survived. Barely." Jack's voice carried a weight of unspoken history. "Spent 8 months in a medical facility, then another 4 tracking down someone crazy enough to break into an Imperial torture facility." "You? Me?" Jack smiled, but it was a sad expression. "She's waiting for you, by the way, on a neutral station called Haven's Rest. Medical facilities, good security, and nobody asks too many questions." Kira felt tears she hadn't shed since childhood, threatening to spill. The thought of seeing her sister again, of being reunited with the only family she had left, was overwhelming. But underneath the joy was a growing understanding of what Jack had risked for a stranger's reunion. "You could have been killed," she said. "Could have been. Wasn't. The Imperial fleet will hunt you now. They'll never stop looking." Jack's expression grew thoughtful. "Probably not, but that's a problem for tomorrow." He was treating the destruction of his life with the same casual acceptance he'd shown when she bit him, as if the consequences of his choices were secondary to doing what he believed was right. "Why?" she asked again, but this time the question carried different weight. Jack was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the stars visible through the viewport. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a sadness that made her chest ache. "Because everyone deserves to go home, Kira, and sometimes Someone has to make that possible. The simple honesty in his words broke something loose in her, chest that had been frozen since her capture. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Kira began to cry. Haven's Rest appeared on their screens like a beacon of hope among the stars. The neutral station occupied a strategic position at the intersection of three major trade routes, its modular construction speaking to decades of gradual expansion. Ships from a dozen different species docked at its numerous ports, a testament to its reputation as a place where politics took second place to commerce and healing. Kira had composed herself during the 3-day journey, but as they approached the docking bay, her hands trembled with anticipation. 8 months of believing her sister was dead, followed by the revelation that Mira not only lived, but had orchestrated her rescue. The emotional whiplash was almost unbearable. "Docking Bay 12, Jack announced, his hands steady on the controls. "She'll be waiting in the medical wing. Section C, room 14. "How do you know that?" Jack's expression grew distant. "Because that's where she's been staying since the doctors cleared her for visitors 3 weeks ago, waiting for me to bring you home." The ship settled onto the docking platform with barely a tremor. Through the viewport, Kira could see the controlled chaos of station life. Cargo haulers, merchant crews, and travelers from across the galaxy going about their business with practiced efficiency. But her attention was focused on a single figure, standing near the medical wing entrance. Even at this distance, even after months of torture and uncertainty, she recognized her sister instantly. Mira stood with the aid of a support cane, her left side clearly favoring an old injury. Scars traced silver lines across what had once been flawless skin, and her hair had grown back white in patches where medical procedures had required shaving. But her eyes, those golden eyes identical to Kira's own, blazed with the same fierce intelligence that had made her the youngest tactical officer in Keeper military history. "She looks," Kira began, then stopped, not knowing how to finish. "Alive," Jack supplied quietly. "She looks alive. Everything else can be healed." They disembarked together, but as they approached the medical wing, Jack began to hang back. Kira noticed and caught his arm, gently careful not to aggravate the bite wounds that were still healing. "Where are you going?" "This is a private moment," Jack replied. "You two have a lot to catch up on, Jack." Mira's voice carried across the space between them, and Kira turned to see her sister approaching with careful but determined steps. "Thank you." The words were simple, but the emotion behind them was anything but. Mira's voice carried gratitude so profound it seemed to change the air itself. Jack nodded acknowledgement, but before he could respond, Mira had reached them. The reunion was everything Kira had dreamed of during her darkest moments in captivity. Mira's arms around her, the familiar scent of her sister's hair, the impossible reality of being together again after months of believing it would never happen. They held each other and cried, and for a few precious minutes, the rest of the galaxy ceased to exist. "I thought you were dead," Kira whispered against her sister's shoulder. "I was, technically, for about 4 minutes. Mira's voice carried the matter-of-fact tone that had always masked her deepest emotions. "Turns out humans have interesting ideas about when someone stops being retrievable." Kira pulled back to look at Jack, who was attempting to slip away unnoticed. "You saved her too." "Different circumstances," Jack replied. "She was in a human medical facility. All I did was make sure she got the care she needed." But Mira shook her head. "He did much more than that. When the doctors said my injuries were too severe, that my species' physiology couldn't heal from that kind of trauma, Jack spent 6 weeks researching Keeper biology. He found experimental treatments, consulted with specialists across 3 sectors, and refused to accept that recovery was impossible." Kira studied Jack's face, seeing the familiar pattern of downplaying his own contributions. "Why?" "Because giving up wasn't an option," Jack said simply, "and because she had something worth fighting for." He gestured to Kira, and the meaning was clear. Mira had fought to survive because she knew her sister was still alive somewhere, still needed saving. Her recovery had been driven by the same love that had motivated her to find Jack and commission Kira's rescue. "The 3 of us need to talk," Mira said. her tactical mind clearly working through implications. The Imperial response to Kira's escape is going to be severe. They'll hunt all of us now. Jack nodded. I figured as much. You figured? Kira stared at him. You knew this would make you a permanent enemy of the Empire, and you did it anyway? Seemed like the right thing to do. The casual way he accepted the complete upheaval of his life left both sisters speechless. In their experience, such sacrifices were made for family, for duty, for causes larger than individual conscience. But Jack seemed to operate by an entirely different moral framework, one that valued individual lives over personal safety, that measured success by compassion rather than conquest. What do we do now? Kira asked. Mira smiled, and for the first time since her injury, it was the fierce expression Kira remembered from their shared childhood. Now we disappear. There are places in the galaxy where even the Empire can't reach, people who value freedom over politics. Jack knows some of them. You're coming with us? Kira asked Jack. He looked surprised by the question. If you want me to. The answer should have been obvious, but Kira found herself struggling with emotions she couldn't quite categorize. Jack represented something new in her experience: kindness without expectation, strength without dominance, sacrifice without martyrdom. The idea of continuing to travel with him felt both natural and terrifying. Yes, she said finally. I want you to stay. Jack's smile was worth every moment of uncertainty that had led to this point. The ship Jack chartered for their journey to the Outer Territories was a converted merchant vessel called the Wayward Star. Its captain, a grizzled Terran woman named Eleanor, asked no questions about her passengers and made it clear she expected the same courtesy in return. The 3-week voyage would take them beyond Imperial jurisdiction, into regions where frontier law and personal reputation mattered more than political allegiance. Kira found herself studying Jack during the long days of hyperspace travel. Away. From the immediate pressures of rescue and reunion, she had time to observe the small details that revealed character. He read voraciously, technical manuals, philosophy texts, and what appeared to be poetry in languages she didn't recognize. His damaged arm was healing with remarkable speed, the bite wounds closing with minimal scarring, despite the severity of her attack. Your species has impressive regenerative capabilities, she commented one evening as they shared dinner in the ship's small common area. Decent immune system too, Jack replied, cutting his synthetic meat with careful precision. Though, I'll admit, your venom was more potent than I expected. You could have died. Could have. Didn't. The familiar response made her want to shake him. Mira looked up from her own meal, golden eyes shifting between them with obvious interest. Jack processes risk differently than we do, she observed. I've been trying to figure out his decision-making patterns for months. And? Humans seem to evaluate outcomes based on potential rather than probability, Mira continued. Where we might see a 10% chance of success and decide the risk is too high, Jack sees the same odds and focuses on the 90% chance that someone benefits regardless. Jack paused in his eating. That's actually not a bad analysis. It's also completely insane, Kira pointed out. Probably, Jack agreed cheerfully. But it works for me. The conversation was interrupted by Elena's voice over the ship's intercom. All passengers to the bridge, we've got company. They found the captain studying her long-range sensors with a frown that spoke of professional concern. 3 ships had dropped out of hyperspace behind them. Imperial design, but flying without identifying transponders. Bounty hunters, Elena. Diagnosed. Good ones too, they've been tracking us for at least 2 days. Kira felt ice form in her stomach. They're after us. Probably, Elena agreed. Question is, what do you want to do about it? The obvious answer was to run. The Wayward Star was fast, and Elena had a reputation for creative navigation. But running would only delay the inevitable. The Empire had resources that dwarfed anything they could marshal, and bounty hunters were notoriously persistent. What are our options? Jack asked. Elena's smile was sharp as a blade. Well, we could try to outrun them. Maybe make it to Terminus Station before they catch us. And if we can't, then we fight, and probably die. Kira exchanged glances with her sister. Both of them were warriors, trained from birth to face impossible odds. But they were also realists. 3 ships meant at least 20 armed professionals, equipped with military-grade weapons and hunting them for profit. There's a third option, Jack said quietly. Elena raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. We talked to them. The suggestion was so unexpected that for a moment nobody responded. Then Elena began laughing, a harsh sound that spoke of too many years in dangerous spaces. Talk to bounty hunters. Kid, you really are as crazy as your reputation suggests. Maybe, Jack acknowledged, but hear me out. He moved to the communications console, his fingers dancing across the controls with practiced ease. Bounty hunters are business people. They take contracts because the payment exceeds the risk. Change that equation and you change their behavior. What are you proposing? Mira asked, her tactical mind clearly working through possibilities. Negotiation, Jack replied simply. We offer them something more valuable than their current contract. Before anyone could object, he opened a communication channel to the pursuing ships. A face appeared on the screen, human, scarred, with the cold eyes of someone who killed for money. This is Captain Rex Morrison of the Crimson Tide. You've got something that belongs to the Empire. Surrender now and we'll make this easy. Captain Morrison, Jack replied, his tone conversational. My name is Jack. I'd like to discuss a business proposition. Morrison's expression shifted to amused interest. You want to negotiate with bounty hunters while you're running from us? That's either brilliant or suicidal. Hopefully brilliant. I'm prepared to offer you and your crews something more valuable than whatever the Empire is paying for our capture. And what might that be? Jack's smile was enigmatic. Information. Specifically, the location of an abandoned Keeper research facility containing technology worth approximately 50 million credits on the black market. Kira felt her blood turn to ice. Such a facility would be beyond price. Its contents capable of shifting the balance of power throughout the galaxy. It was also, she was certain, completely fictional. But Morrison's eyes had gone very still, very focused. You're lying. Maybe, Jack agreed. But can you afford to assume that? Your current contract is worth what? Maybe 100,000 per target? I'm offering you enough to retire. The communication channel went silent as Morrison presumably conferred with his partners. Kira grabbed Jack's arm, careful of his healing wounds. There is no facility, she hissed. No, Jack agreed quietly, but they don't know that, and by the time they figure it out, we'll be long gone. Eleanor was staring at him with newfound respect. You magnificent bastard. You're going to con 3 ships full of armed killers. If it works. Morrison's face reappeared on the screen. We're listening. The negotiations took 6 hours. Jack spun an elaborate fiction about a Keeper research station lost during the war, its location known only to a handful of survivors. He provided just enough technical detail to sound credible, just enough uncertainty to explain why he wasn't pursuing the treasure himself. Morrison and his crews were professionals, but they were also human. The prospect of a score large enough to set them up for life was intoxicating, and Jack played that desire with the skill of a master musician. The coordinates are in a secure data vault on Terminus Station, Jack explained, his voice carrying just the right mix of reluctance and hope. I'll transfer the access codes once we reach port. Consider it a gesture of good faith. And if you're lying, Morrison asked, then you're out a few days and some fuel costs. If I'm telling the truth, you're rich beyond your wildest dreams. In the end, greed won over caution. The bounty hunters agreed to escort them to Terminus Station rather than capture them, gambling that the potential reward justified the risk. Elena guided the wayward star into the station's docking bay with her usual competence, the 3-hunter, ships maintaining formation around them like a predatory honor guard. As soon as they were secured, Jack began implementing the next phase of his plan. I need to make a few arrangements, he told Morrison over the comm. Give me 12 hours to access the vault and confirm the coordinates. Meet me at Docking Bay 7 tomorrow morning. What Jack actually did was contact a friend, another human named David, who ran what appeared to be a legitimate shipping business, but was actually one of the most sophisticated smuggling operations in the sector. Within 8 hours, new identification, documents had been prepared, passage to the freelands had been arranged, and their trail had been obscured by a web of false transactions and misleading records. "Time to go," Jack announced as they prepared to leave the Wayward Star for the final time. Elena accepted payment for their passage with the professionalism of someone who had seen every variety of human drama. "Good luck," she told them. "And, Jack, next time you want to con a bunch of bounty hunters, maybe give me more warning. My heart isn't what it used to be." They transferred to David's ship, a sleek courier vessel called the Night's Edge, just as Morrison was beginning to get suspicious about the delayed data transfer. By the time the bounty hunters realized they'd been played, their quarry was already 2 jumps away and accelerating toward freedom. "That was incredibly risky," Mira observed as they settled into their new accommodations. "Worked, though," Jack replied, reviewing star charts for their destination. Kira found herself studying him again, trying to understand the moral framework. That allowed him to lie to dangerous criminals while showing genuine kindness to former enemies. "You feel guilty about deceiving them." It wasn't a question. She was learning to read his micro-expressions, and she could see the conflict in his eyes. "A little," Jack admitted. "But they chose to hunt people for money. I chose to protect people who needed help. I can live with the consequences of my choice." The distinction mattered to him, she realized. Jack operated by a complex ethical code that valued intention over outcome, that weighed harm against benefit, in ways that were foreign to her military training. It was a philosophy that celebrated individual worth over systemic power. 2 weeks later, they reached the Freelands, a loose confederation of worlds that had declared independence from all galactic governments and somehow made it stick. Their new home was a planet called Sanctuary, where the only law was don't hurt people who aren't hurting you, and refugees from across the galaxy had found places to build new lives. Standing on the balcony of their rented apartment, watching the sun set over a city populated by dozens of different species, Kira felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood. Peace. "What happens now?" she asked Jack, who was leaning against the railing beside her. "Now we live," he replied simply. "We find work that matters, we help people who need it, and we remember that freedom is something you have to choose every day." Mira joined them on the balcony, moving more easily now that regular medical care had accelerated her recovery. "I've been thinking about Jack's philosophy," she announced. "And humans are dangerous," Mira continued, "but not in the way the rest of the galaxy assumes. They're not dangerous because they're stronger or more aggressive than other species. They're dangerous because they refuse to accept that things have to be the way they are." Jack turned to look at her, surprise evident in his expression. "Think about it," Mira went on. "Every other species I've encountered operates within established parameters. We accept limitations, work within systems, follow protocols. But humans look at an impossible situation and ask, what if it wasn't impossible?" Kira nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. "You broke me out of an Imperial facility because you refused to accept that it couldn't be done." "The Empire had you," Jack agreed. "That was a fact, but it wasn't a permanent fact. Facts can be changed if you're willing to pay the price, and you were willing to pay any price." Jack was quiet for a moment, watching the alien sunset paint the sky in colors that had no names in human languages. "Not any price," he said finally. "But I was willing to pay my price. There's a difference." Over the following months, they built a life together that none of them had expected. Jack established a consulting business, helping other refugees navigate the complex process of starting over in the Freelands. His reputation as someone who could solve impossible problems spread quickly, and soon he was mediating disputes, arranging rescues, and occasionally talking armed groups out of violence through sheer stubborn compassion. Kira found work as a security consultant, using her military training to protect people rather than destroy them. It was satisfying in ways that warfare had never been, the knowledge that her strength served those who needed protection rather than those who demanded conquest. Mira recovered more completely than her doctors had thought possible, eventually taking a position with the Freeland's diplomatic corps. Her analytical mind and understanding of galactic politics made her invaluable in negotiations with the various governments that reluctantly recognized Sanctuary's independence. But it was the small moments that mattered most. Jack, teaching Kira to cook human food, his patience endless as she struggled with unfamiliar ingredients and techniques. Mira and Kira sharing stories of their childhood, while Jack listened with the fascination of someone discovering a new culture. The three of them working together to help other refugees, forming a family based not on blood or obligation, but on choice and mutual respect. One evening, almost a year after their arrival on Sanctuary, Kira found Jack sitting alone on their balcony staring up at the stars. "Regrets?" she asked, settling beside him. "Some," Jack admitted. "I had a life before this, people who cared about me, a career that mattered to me." "Do you miss it?" Jack considered the question seriously. "I miss parts of it, but I don't regret the choice I made." "Even though it cost you everything?" "It didn't cost me everything," Jack replied, turning to meet her golden eyes. "It cost me one version of my life so I could have a different one, a better one." Kira felt her breath catch. Over the months they'd lived together, her feelings for Jack had evolved in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. He represented everything she'd been taught was impossible: strength without cruelty, courage without aggression, love without possession. "Jack," she began, then stopped, not knowing how to continue. "I know," he said softly. "I feel it too. It's complicated. Most worthwhile things are." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the strange constellations of their new home. Finally, Kira spoke again. "My people have a saying: the strongest bonds are forged in the fire of shared adversity." "Humans have something similar," Jack replied. "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." "But that's not quite right, is it?" Kira mused. "What doesn't kill you gives you the opportunity to choose who you want to become." Jack smiled, and in that expression she saw everything that had drawn her to him: the compassion that had endured her attack, the determination that had freed her from captivity, the quiet strength that had given her a new life. "I love you," she said, the words coming easier than she'd expected. "I love you too," Jack replied without hesitation. When Mira found them the next morning, still sitting together on the balcony as the alien sun rose over their adopted world, her smile was brighter than the dawn. "About time," she said, settling into the chair across from them. "I was beginning to think you two were going to dance around each other forever." "How long have you known?" Kira asked. "Since the day Jack walked into that torture chamber and let you bite him," Mira replied. "Nobody endures that kind of pain for a stranger, and nobody bites someone they don't want to trust." Looking back, Kira realized her sister was right. The moment Jack had refused to pull away from her attack, refused to respond with violence or retreat, something fundamental had shifted between them. She had tested him in the most primal way possible, and he had passed by simply refusing to fail. They were dangerous, these humans, but not in any way the galaxy understood. They were dangerous because they made the impossible seem inevitable, because they turned victims into survivors and strangers into family. They were dangerous because they looked at a universe built on power and hierarchy and asked a simple question: what if we were kind instead? And sometimes, impossibly, the universe answered back. Then everything changes. As the three of them sat together, watching their new world wake up around them, Kira understood that Jack had given her more than freedom. He had given her proof that the galaxy could be better than it was, that individuals could choose to be more than their programming or their circumstances demanded. It was a dangerous idea, the kind that started revolutions and toppled empires. But it was also, she realized, the kind of idea that built homes and families and futures worth fighting for. In the end, that was what made humans truly special, not their strength or their cunning, but their stubborn, irrational, magnificent refusal to accept that kindness was weakness. They insisted on being better than they had to be, and somehow they made everyone around them want to be better too. The galaxy would never be the same. And that, Kira thought, as Jack's hand found hers, was exactly as it should be,